Herman, I love your passion, your commitment, your constant movement and strategic thinking that's been going on over the decades of your life. And I want to ask you now, what do you recommend to people who are interested in moving into some of these upper echelon circles? How can people prepare themselves for those kinds of responsibilities?
One of the questions I do get asked is exactly that. How did I get into the boardroom? What did I do? Well, so the surprising thing is, despite all of the years on the picket line against the Washington Redskins because they refused to hire brownskins, against Auto Row because they refused to hire minorities, against the war in Vietnam and other against the agricultural owners of the grapes, helping Cesar with the grape boycott. Despite all of that, despite all the years of activism, I managed to get on these boards, and it's not something I wish for. My parents never owned stock in any company. We never even talked about the boardroom. And so why did it happen? I think it happened because activists become known in the community. And I think the other part of that is responsible activists, people who get involved but take responsibility for change in a responsible way. In other words, you organize for responsible social change. Those of us and those who want change have to take responsibility for change. So again, more to my surprise than anything, I received a call to join the board of Pacific Telephone and Telegraph Company. The story behind that was the United Way of America in the Bay Area had never made grants to Latino community-based organizations. So I set up a group called Barruf Bay Area Raza for United Funds, and we picketed United Way. And it so happened that the chair of the United Way at the time was a very nice man by the name of Jerry Hull. And so one day I got a call from Jerry's office asking me to have lunch with him. So I had lunch with him, and he wanted to get a sense of my view of the company. And I said, well, I felt that, there was a lot of things that you probably can do to make the company more appreciated, like having better affirmative action policies and so on. But I said, you're also a leader in the community. You're not just CEO of a company. I said, you're head of United Way, and I think something's got to change there. And he said, you're right. And he said, by the way, your opinions are the reasons why we'd like you to join our board of directors. I almost fell off my chair because I had no idea what it was about. I could have just kind of bombed myself out of the water. But also, I think that relationships do count for a lot. I had met Ruth Chance, who was at that time the executive director of the Rosenberg Foundation, one of the finest, best organizations in the country. And Ruth Chance is a very highly respected CEO of a foundation, and used to call me from time to time to get my opinion about particular things going on in the community and how Rosenberg might help. And so we developed a good relationship. And at one point, I got a call to join the board of trustees of the Rosenberg Foundation. And then that led to Rockefeller, and then that led to the San Francisco Foundation, that led to the California Endowment, and so on. So what I say to young people, don't be afraid of getting involved. Don't be afraid of giving back. As long as you're obeying the law, you're going to be okay. But if you don't act, and I think it's a big question that I look for, is I really pray that the next generation of leadership will be bold and not be timid. When I think of Ed Roybal, when I think of Bert Corona, when I think of a lot of people who, Dr. Ernesto Galarza, for example, long before Cesar Chavez was a household name, was out there challenging the underpinnings of agribusiness, how they exploited workers. And it was Ernesto that stopped the Bracero program, stopped a program that for 13 years had brought 3.5 million workers, temporary workers from Mexico to work in the fields. It was Ernesto who was one of the first to show that it would be futile to organize domestic farm workers unless you stop temporary workers. And he fought and led the fight to stop the Bracero program. Yet people hear about Cesar, but they don't hear about the foundation that Ernesto uh, created in order to move farm worker movement. So a lot of folks don't get the limelight. And I think that that's okay, as long as you realize that what you're doing, as in the song for chorus line, I did what I did for love. Because, you know, you have to have some sense of responsibility, but also know why you're doing it. You know, what are your values? Why do you do this? Well, I, for one, value the building and sustaining of resident power, community-based power, as a solution to many of the problems that we face in our society. An old friend, John Gardner, once wrote that democracy begins with us. We cannot let it end with us. And with all of the dark money floating around, with hundreds of millions of dollars floating from rich people to raise suspicions about immigration, they're anti-immigration, they're anti-climate change. They dispense all kinds of fake news that undermines our democracy. And so we have, I think the organizing today is more difficult than it was years ago. In the old days, we were afraid of being labeled as communists. But to solve that, we would invite Father McDonald or another priest to our meeting wearing the Roman collar to show that we were okay, we weren't communists. But today, you can try to do the right thing and you'll be accused of something else from people you never know about, you've never heard about. I mean, there's a lot of hatred and cynicism going on in this country, and many of our own people bite into that stuff. So organizing is very difficult. And I think young people thinking about moving into the sweet suites have to take responsibility for change. There's no such thing as a free lunch. You know, if you want to get ahead in corporate America or in foundations, you've got to play your dues. And there's nothing wrong with having tried to bring about change if you act in a responsible way. And that's all I've ever tried to do. I mean, people have gone to jail for things they believe in. Look at Martin Luther King and so on. And there are times when you have to know that maybe you will have to pay the penalty for that. But on the other hand, to raise your voice, to challenge institutional power, even if it's at some cost to yourself, then that's what you have to prepare to do. You can't
Well, you do, and I think it is a time for boldness. It is a time for boldness. And you made the point of, you had been very honest and forthright, and you spoke your word, and then you're offered, a board position. I had a similar time like that when I was in my 20s, and I was working at United Way, and I'd been the director, a very successful director. We had the most successful job placement training program among all of the war on poverty programs, manpower development programs for high school dropouts, disadvantaged youth. And so I gave my farewell talk, at some meeting of the United Way higher ups. And it was a very white organization at that time. They hadn't had any kind of diversity on their boards or their staffing. I was my staff. And I had multicultural staff to represent the populations of Los Angeles County. So I'm giving my bold statement about what they needed to do and why I had an effective team and blah, 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 blah. Frank, the general manager, I think it was Frank McNamara, I could be forgetting, but it was 50 years ago. And he comes up to me after the lunch. He says, "Yolanda, please don't leave us. We need you. We need you." I said, "I'm gone. I'm gone." And I moved on to the chancellor's office for the state university system, which is another story. But it's interesting how boldness, and I don't know why some people are afraid to be bold. I mean, you're speaking very clearly. Some people may take umbrage with what you're talking about, but you're being honest and direct, and you're being truthful, and you're coming from a place of heart, a place of integrity, a place of, I would say, virtue. And that's one of the things I want to ask you about is which, you're in the book of virtues, you're in the prudence chapter actually. And what have been the virtues that have driven you?
What have been the virtue, what?
That have driven you, that have made your character shape?
Well, I come back to, what are the core values that drive you? I mean, core values that we learn from our families, from our faith, from those places that inspire us and move us. For example, I truly value the energy and the talent and fearlessness of youth leadership. Having come up with the likes of Cesar Chavez and others as a young person, I do value the energy of youth leadership. I just think that direction is important. I value the dignity and worth of every individual. I think respect is a very important thing. We learn those from families. I really do value the issue of diversity and inclusiveness at all levels, including the boardrooms of the hallowed halls of power in America. I value the value of integrity and seek to be honest and accountable and transparent. I also value working for responsible social change. I've said that before, in the spirit and practice of nonviolence. I don't believe in violence, and I think we destroy more than we hope to build. And I value the collaboration with other organizations working in common cause to protect human rights, equity, and justice across the board for all people left behind. And I learned that very early in civil rights. So we learn how to collaborate with others who could teach us something. I remember at first being very put off by people that disagreed with me. And then I learned that, you know, maybe they have something to teach me. Maybe there's something I can gain by the differences that we have. And so I learned, rather than being hostile or angry about these differences, learn to sit down and to listen carefully to what people were trying to tell me, to get it through my thick head, that maybe what they had was maybe something I still couldn't agree with, but I respected and began to understand that maybe there was something I could work with. So I think those things are helpful, of course, to have family support system. This kind of work is hard on families. You're gone a lot. Sometimes you're not able to keep doing all the things you want to do, because you do have to think about the fact that there's more to life than just work, more than just the sense of doing, that there's more to life to have joy and fun. Unfortunately, I've kind of learned this too late. About 25 years ago, my wife bought me a guitar, still in my office, unopened. I've never learned how to play it. So before I take that last walk in the sunset, I'm going to learn to play the guitar.
You and me both, I think. I played the piano. I want to go back to that. There's another time era I want to take us back to, because it was a very important gathering. And it was 1993, after Congressman Roybal left Congress after 30 years of service. He was wonderful, man. I met him when I was a little girl. And I reminded him of that because my aunt and uncle had supported him when he was running for city council. But he was a beautiful spirit. We're there celebrating him. I was the mistress of ceremonies that night. And it was you, Bert Corona, Cesar Chavez, and Congressman Roybal that were at my table. And I wanted to talk to each of you so much and just, ask you questions. But of course, there wasn't the opportunity. And Cesar died just a matter of weeks after that. You had wanted to meet with him. In fact, didn't you set a meeting? What did you want to talk to him about?
Well, I've never forgotten that event, the event that you hosted, that you emceed, and a gathering with the likes of Cesar, Bert, and you, and Congressmember Roybal. Roybal was very special to me. One time, he wrote a letter of recommendation when I wanted to go to graduate school. And I went to see him to thank him. And he said, look, your being here, thanking me is enough. He says, all I ask you is just help someone else. And that's the kind of person he was. But that dinner was important because I was asked to extend a few brief remarks, which I did. And I told the story about my granddaughter, Natalie, who came to see me about a term paper she was writing about the life of Cesar Chavez. And I went and told her about all the stuff we did starting in South Puedes and beyond. And then her face got very serious, and she said, Grandpa, I have a question. I said, yes, Natalie, what is it? She said, Grandpa, how come Caesar's famous and you're not? And I said, Natalie, the Lord works in mysterious ways. But I also told her, I said, Natalie, what we do, we don't do to become marquee names. We don't do it, for applause or for awards. We do it because it's the right thing to do. So after the meeting was breaking up, Cesar and I were exchanging goodbyes. And he said, look, when I finish in Arizona, he said, I'd like you to come to Keene and we can talk. And of course, that never took place because he passed away in Arizona. And so I often thought about it, and I'm glad you asked that. What would we have talked about if I had gone to Keene and meet with him? I think we probably would have talked about our past experiences, but our successes and our failures. I mean, it's important to talk about where we failed to do things that we felt were important and why it didn't work out, and then keep going. And I think we would also acknowledge what I had said earlier, that we have to take into account the help we got from people like a Fred Ross, and Linsky, and others, Roy Ball, who was older, and also many of the great people in Los Angeles that you were peers with. Henrietta Viscusa, for example, went on to become a very well-known public health nurse in this country, caring about vulnerable populations. You had J.J. Rodriguez, who went on to become the head of the California Labor Federation. Gillanaya, who was with the steelworkers, A.P. Tony Rios. You had so many folks that paved the way in stopping police unwarranted actions, police brutality, paved the way to get Ed Roybal become the first Mexican-American city council member in 80 years through the CSO voter registration program. These were pioneers even before I got involved, and paved the way for others to get courage to do the right thing. So I think young people have to look at where are the role models, where are the people who have been before us, so they don't think that we've accomplished nothing. You know, we've tried to do our best, and as I said, the problems of the past are still here, but we've made some changes. You know, we've lowered the dropout rate. We have looked at the criminal justice system and agreed it has to change. We have registered our people to vote, but yet one of the challenges, for example, is every year, some 900,000 young Latino men and women in this country become eligible to vote. And yet you have 17 states in this country that have passed voter suppression laws, which make it difficult for people of color to have access to the ballot box. So just in that in itself is a great challenge for young people. So if young people want to be into the boardroom someplace, let them show that you were a leader in helping Latinos to register and to vote, to bring about social change. Show that you worked on getting United Way to be more responsive. And by the way, when I did join the board of the phone company, I was elected and reelected for various telecom boards for 30 years, continuously. So what was interesting that when I went to one of my first board meetings with the phone company, there were a person there who didn't want to shake my hands because he knew I was very closely allied with Ernesto Galarza, and Galarza had sued him and his company because of agribusiness issues. But later, we got to know one another. His wife was very involved in some projects and got to know her. I got to know him on a personal basis. So he probably no longer viewed me as a militant white-eyed Chicano who was trying to mau for change. So I think we have to let good ideas take time to mature. And sometimes we can have false assumptions about other people from both sides. And I think we have to be mature enough to let that happen. And these are things that we benefit from having mentors, but unfortunately along the way, we don't have a lot of mentors. I'm sure when you first started, Yolanda, you didn't have many mentors that could be by your side to help you to, how do you work through a difficult situation? I remember one time when I had just gotten elected to the board of the telephone company, a shareholder came up to me, pointed her finger in my face, and, well, how did you get on this board? First, I started to say about my background and education, I could be helpful to the company and things. I said, oh no, I said, by the way, I received 197 million shareholder votes. That's how I got elected. So I'm just saying is that if I had had somebody, a Latino who had been on a corporate board to mentor me, by the way, you're going to encounter these kinds of situations and you need to be prepared for that they think you're an affirmative action baby. You got on there because you had no brains, but you were there to, you know, because they felt sorry for us or something. I remember one time when I was leaving the Rockefeller Foundation board, I was on the nominating committee. I wanted to replace myself with two Hispanics, one male, one female. And they went through the process of searching. I had given names of groups like Maldef and others to contact for names of people that could easily serve on the board. And the chair of the board came up to me and said, you know, Herman, it's too bad you don't have a dozen Cesar Chavez that we could nominate. Could we put someone like that on our board in a minute? I said, wait a minute. I said, just because you don't read about somebody in New York Times, you don't think anybody else has a brain in their head. And as it was, they selected someone from Los Angeles who was an attorney and he was working for Warner Brothers, I believe. I learned that he was one of the best trustees you could ever have. And we succeeded in getting two people for the first time on the board. When I joined that board, there were 4 African Americans on the board. We got the second one. And one of the board members, I wondered whether he was going to fill out his term. And I said, have you really kind of checked that out? And he said, oh yeah, no problem. Well, a year later, that individual resigned to pursue later other interests, and that position was laid vacant for many years. So I'm saying we have to take responsibility for things that we want to do. Another time I had recommended a person to be on a national board. And a year later, a friend of mine that I had given the name to approached me. I said, by the way, how's so-and-so doing on your board? He said, well, she never showed up for a single meeting. So that's an exception. You know, when someone in our community does something off the wall, people kind of approach me on that. I said, look, every community has its share of nuts. You know, we are like any other group. You know, we are vulnerable to perfection and imperfection. We have to be more tolerant of each other and not expect that we all walk on water. So we do need to be generous and forgiving in the way in which we do this kind of work. And so I think people who want to get into this work have to be concerned about pulling the other person behind, giving back to the community, and also do what you do because you're doing it for love.
Well, it's very important to do everything for love, and we certainly need more love and compassion in the world. I want to thank you so much, Herman Gallegos, for joining us today. May God grant you good health and ongoing longevity, because you have so much more to share with us. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm Yolanda Nava, and this is Do You See What I See? See you next time.